We ready to get started? All right. So most of you are in my class. How's it going? But we could be sitting in the classroom. More comfortable seats in here. For those of you who aren't, I'm David Barbie. I'm the director of the Music Business Program at UGA, and it is my great honor and privilege to be even remotely involved with what's going on here today. I grew up in Atlanta and attended school at the University of Georgia, and I knew quite a bit about these two gentlemen in my years as a rock fan, as later a participant in the business, because they've done so much. And growing up in the South in the 70s, there were two Jimmys that were very greatly aware of in my life that had great meaning to me in their careers. One, Jimmy Carter, with whom Mr. Peter Conlon has had some involvement we'll hear about, and the other, Jimi Hendrix, who I believe Mr. Alex Cooley had some involvement with at one time as well. I should also mention that, as Alex and I discussed earlier today, Alex promoted the first rock concert that I saw, which means that at my age you've obviously been doing this quite a while. And Peter and I were just talking about some shows that he's been involved with over the years, going way back, that I was a young fellow out in the audience, pretty happy about that. Conducting the Q&A today is Miss Lisa Love, who basically is we just talked about this, I can never keep it straight, but Lisa basically is the royal overseer of all things music and film for the government of the state of Georgia. That's a modest enough introduction of your...
Not so modest, but I'll take it.
Okay, great. Anyway, I could go on, but the longer I talk, the less time these folks are going to get to. So let's hear it for the three of them, and here we go.
Well, this is really a career highlight for me, and in the immortal words of Wayne and Garth, I'm not worthy. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity to get you two to talk today and to share some stories with us. You know, the music industry is made up in large part of business around recorded music. But just as important is live music. You know, recorded music is always going to be the same every time you listen to that, I would say record, but to that digital download, it's going to be the same. But live music is different, and every show, every night is different. And a band might do 20, 30, 100 shows, but every single night there's going to be different. And it's going to be a different experience created between the artist and the audience. And that's really special. And between these two gentlemen, they have created and brought more live music experiences to more audiences than anybody I know in America. So it's a great honor to be here today. And I think one of the things in researching and looking around, part of the story that's not been told that I hope that you will each share with us is a little bit of your early life. Both of these gentlemen are born in Atlanta. But Alex, if you'll just start off, if you don't mind telling us about your parents and your siblings in your early life, and when was music really, how was music, if it was, integrated into your early upbringing in Atlanta?
That's a big question, Lisa. I was born in Atlanta in 1939. My father was a furniture salesman. My mother worked for Southern Bell, so we were a working class family. Grew up in Atlanta, went to high school at Grady, and then went off and kind of saw the world for a few years and came back. And I started making, I was involved with some people that owned a pizza restaurant on Roswell Road, and we were notoriously bad at making pizzas. So I started doing what I think is regarded as doo-wop groups on the weekend, and we were very successful doing that. And that's kind of how it all started for me.
Wow. Peter, how about you?
Well, I was actually born in Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah, Derby, Connecticut. We moved here when I was 6. I went to school in Atlanta, parochial schools, Manfield Heart of Mary, St. Thomas More, and then Henderson High School, and then the University of Georgia. I got interested in music in high school, and I used to go to Alex's shows. I'm much younger than Alex.
Not much.
I would go to his shows and started getting an interest when I was in about 10th grade in high school. And more so than my friends, because I noticed they really weren't into it then. It was just emerging in the South, because people were still fairly conservative, and soul music still had a hold here, and people dressed very conservatively. And then there was a smaller group of people who were listening to more avant-garde music and harder rock. And that all changed when WPL-FM came online.
Yep.
And it wasn't a commercial station, but it played.
First pop festival.
Yeah, it was the old agricultural news network, I think.
Yeah.
And they turned it and played underground music.
You could find out how much hog bellies were selling for on it. Yeah.
But they would play Jimi Hendrix and stuff that, they were still playing, Dick Clark music on the Beach Boys on the other radio. But then I came to the University of Georgia, and I was just generally bored, and started hanging out at the student union, and was in a fraternity for a while and got on the IFC, and they were doing concerts, and they were doing the wrong ones. I mean, they were still doing soul concerts that two of the guys liked or something, and no one was coming. And I talked them into doing the Allman Brothers, Elton John, Jethro Tull, and they all sold out and started making money. So they started listening to me more, and we started doing shows here. And then when I left, I wanted to be in the business. And I sent Alex a resume, which he never answered. He called me, and I went to law school and got involved with Jimmy Carter, and then went to Washington, worked in the White House for 4 years. And during that time, I met Alex, and we started working together on benefits for Carter, and with Willie, and became good friends. And when I came back after we lost, we started talking over a couple-year period and working together on some projects, and eventually became partners.
You condensed a lot into that. Now, I have a lot of questions. We're going to go back to some of that. But, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you this microphone so that when he says something, you can add in, and I'll just yell out my questions, because what you say is more important than what I say.
This voice is from 40 years of talking on the phone, so I don't have a whole lot of voice.
Well, I've still got a big one, so I can handle it. Peter, you spent some time at Georgia State and then here at UGA. And then from what I read, you went to the Miami Pop Festival in the late 60s. And
You got it. I went to the Miami Pop
He went.
Festival.
I'm sorry, Peter, I meant Alex. You're right.
Yeah, he
You're
went
right.
to Georgia State.
I'm glad I didn't have the microphone then. So you went to Georgia State. You went to the Miami Pop Festival, and there was
Correct.
something about that inspired you
Yeah.
to want to come back. And tell me about that.
Well, Peter was just talking about the early days in Atlanta of rock and roll and what the radio stations were like. I didn't even know about the Miami Pop Festival, but I was going to John Pennekamp Park to dive. I was a scuba diver, and on the way down there, we picked up a Florida station, and there was this festival in Miami that were all the groups I was listening to: Procol Harum. It was an incredible festival. And so instead of diving, we went to that. And that, along with 17 partners, we did the first Atlanta Pop Festival. And that's what gave me the idea, was the Miami Pop Festival.
And talk to us about that first pop festival. That was 1969. How does a kid come back and organize and fund and
Well, we did it because we didn't know it was impossible. Looking at it now, what we did, I wouldn't even dream of it. But I got 16 people together, and we pooled our money. And what Peter was talking about was the doo-wop groups that came through Atlanta. That's the only thing we could get. But we managed to get Janis Joplin and Led Zeppelin. The Allman Brothers were there, although they didn't play, I think. But we put together this festival, and we drew somewhere around 200,000 people. And this was in 1968. And that's really the start of the music scene in Atlanta.
And that was actually a month before Woodstock.
Yeah, that's true.
Which contemporary history says that Woodstock was a starting point of the music industry or concert business, and it really isn't the truth. And another thing that I harp on is that it showed you how national media viewed the South in those days. They really didn't care what we did. It didn't change till Ted Turner started CNN, and we got some respect. But Alex's festival not only drew a couple 100,000 people, it actually made money, and there were no problems. It was an actual disaster. I mean, they lost money.
We felt guilty for making money. You got to understand that was back in the hippie days, and we paid Grateful Dead. We had made $12,000 doing the first Atlanta Pie Festival, and we gave it to the Grateful Dead to do a free show in Piedmont Park, which is probably hardly anybody knows about. I think about 2,000 people came to it, and that was quite an event too.
Yeah, they stopped letting people do shows after that.
Until you started it back. Yeah.
I started back 30 years later.
Before we get, I want to ask you another question. Can you talk about some of those concerts in Piedmont Park and who was putting them on? I know I've heard of the Allman Brothers shows and some of the
Lisa,
other
they were spontaneous combustions almost. I helped with some of them. I hired a sound system one time for it. We just got together and did them. The Allman Brothers wanted to play, and the Allman Brothers came up and rudimentary sound system. They played on the steps near the bathhouse there, and it was just incredible. 10, 12,000 people would come, and it was just it was magic. It really was. And the Allman Brothers, I don't know how many here are Allman Brothers fans or know much about them, but they can play for like 6 hours without drawing a breath hardly, and that's what they did in Piedmont Park. It was really something.
And then I bought them back, 5 years ago, I think. I had them open for Dave Matthews.
Park, yeah.
And bought them back, and it was a huge just interest from everybody because of the connection. I tried to convince Dave of that. Is why I wanted him on the show, and we did 55,000 tickets in 3 days, sold out because of that. The Allman Brothers loved it and had a blast.
Did the brothers like it?
They did. Greg wrote about it in his book. He writes about it. But
You read the book?
Yeah.
Is there any truth in it at all? Rock and roll books tend to be the ones I read anyway.
He glosses over a lot of stuff.
Let me ask you, especially for the students here, when you say there was 10 or 12,000 people at these spontaneous shows and you had 200,000, how did you market shows back then? What did you do to how do they know about it?
Peter mentioned WPLO, and PLO was such an incredible thing that happened in Atlanta. Up until that time, it was top 40 Quixie had a playlist of probably 20 songs that they played over and over and over again. And WPLO came along, and the guy that started it was Ed Shane. And the corporate owners of PLO at that time were that drug company, Plow. And they didn't know what Ed was doing. He kind of had it to himself. Back then, FM wasn't as valuable as AM was. And so he started programming it, and Ed was just a big music fan and just did a great job. And it was the first thing like that in Atlanta. And at that time, I would buy a schedule on PLO, and that's about all. That's what my marketing consisted of. And as we were talking over lunch, now it's social media, and I have 3 guys that sit at a computer all day, and that's what marketing is now. I don't know what the hell they do. They manage to promote shows with social media, and I'm sure all of y'all know a lot more about that than I do.
Well, in those days, too, about Piedmont, you had a thing called the Strip. And from Peachtree, from 10th to 14th, were all head shops. And it's where all the hippies hung out in Atlanta. And then they would meander down to the park.
People used to drive from small towns to see the hippies, because that was a big draw. And you could, like on Friday and Saturday, you had to stay away from that part of Peachtree because it was packed.
Yeah, but the
With
meandering
people
out the
from
park.
Duluth and Locust Grove looking at the hippies.
Yeah, and then you had the people come in and look, but you always had a large group down there to start with. But I went to one of the Allman Brothers shows when I was in high school.
And Piedmont Park,
Yeah,
never told
so,
me that.
yeah. Wasn't really aware of who
They were incredible things.
Well, it was before Fillmore East, and a lot of people didn't know who they were.
Yeah. They were, at that time, they were much bigger in the Northeast than they were in the South. In fact, they still are, as far as that goes. When they were getting no airplay whatsoever, and very few people knew about them. I was staying at a place in upstate New York and listening to a radio station that was programming them all night long, which was unheard of. So in the Northeast is really where the Allman Brothers started.
They broke out on the Fillmore East album and changed
That
the
was-
commercial,
yeah, that
and
was-
that's when they got really big.
I don't know if y'all have listened to that, but if you want to really hear some incredible rock and roll live at the Fillmore, the Allman Brothers, one of the best. You know, you hear this thing about what albums would you take to the desert isle with you? That would be one I would take for sure.
That was the last one I think Dwayne played on, right?
Yes.
Can you get, before Atlanta Pop Festival, Alex, you're doing these doo-wop shows. Did you consider that your full-time job? I think I read maybe is it between the first and the second pop festival you started
Well,
out at
Lisa,
Cooley
I was trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do. The doo-wop thing bored me real quick. You know, I still like some doo-wop, but I'm not a big fan of that. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. When I went to the Miami Pop Festival is when I decided what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was do pop festivals. And from that point, I did 5. I did 2 in Atlanta, 1 in Texas, 1 in, believe it or not, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And that's when I decided you couldn't, I left San Juan, Puerto Rico, or I left the festival site in a garbage truck because there was a warrant out for my arrest. And a Delta plane lowered the rear door so I could get on in San Juan. Otherwise, I'd probably still be in prison in San Juan. That's when I decided pop festivals, as we knew them then, were not.
You still have the greatest marketing promotion I've ever heard of in the music business. They had a Gillette sponsorship, and Alex gave away 3 razor blades.
I'll get you for this.
That's
I
like a
did
bad
not
joke.
do that. It did happen. And it did happen while I was in San Juan. They had a promotion and
They gave away
gave
razor blades.
razor blades away. I think there were 3 people killed and 20 mutilated. But that was not me. I've done a lot of things, but that one was not me.
Well,
I will
before
get you for that.
Before we, for the time being, leave the pop festivals, talk about the second International Atlanta Pop Festival and coming to Byron, Georgia. And for those of you who don't know, Byron is probably 20 miles south of Macon, and it's still extremely slow there in Byron. So I'd like you to give us the whole picture of what you did
You know, Lisa,
in that little town.
I was just there because they have a, I don't know if y'all have seen them, the things on the highway where they have a historical site and there's a brass thing with it. They have one in Byron, Georgia, where I did the second pop festival. And the unveiling of it was about a month or so ago, and I was there. And this time I was welcome. They gave me the key to the city. Before I almost had to sneak out like I did in San Juan. But the second Atlanta festival, and there's been all sorts of people that have tried to figure out how many people were there. It was somewhere between 300 and 700,000 people. I went up in a helicopter on the Saturday morning of the festival. And traffic was backed up from Byron, Georgia, through Atlanta to the varsity.
Yeah, I tried to, we were gonna
You were
come.
one of the ones, yeah. that were-
My friends,
was in traffic
we never
jam.
planned, we left on a Saturday morning and headed down, which was those days the Northeast Expressway,
Right.
which is now 85, and where you hit that corner where the W is now, which was the big Delta sign, the traffic stopped and went all the way past Macon. So we turned around and went home.
A lot of people did, but a lot of people came, and it was truly an amazing thing, that many people in South Georgia. If you knew the context, the sociological context that this was in, we were in a county that, I mean, could be considered backward, one of the nicer words for it at that point in time. And all of a sudden, somewhere around 500,000 young people descended on the town. And we didn't mean for that to happen. We thought we would do 100,000 people, and that's what we were geared up for. But people had a different idea about it. And it was, there's a guy here who's assembling a documentary about it. He was here earlier. Hopefully there's a movie that is in existence that might come out about it. It's in the process of being finished, and maybe it won't be. The guy that owns the rights to it does not want to release it because of piracy. And he's holding it up, waiting for some new technology that will keep people from being able to download it. But in the meantime, all the people that went to it are, dying off. So if it doesn't come out soon, it's not going to be meaningful.
Yeah, one of the real conundrums to me in this business, and it still exists, is the problem you have with municipal authorities on music events. Sport events have always been accepted no matter what you do. Everybody's like clamoring for the Olympics or clamoring for Super Bowl or any big event, but anytime music comes into play, whether it's a large festival, you have to fight the local authorities. I still spend a great deal of time doing it.
But Peter, you don't have any idea what it was like.
In the day what Alex was doing, it was
rock and roll is
impossible.
mainstream now.
Yeah.
Rock and roll is no longer the threat to society that it was at one time. At one time, it was a social movement. It was people were saying things in records that needed to be said, on albums that needed to be said, and it was really hated at that point in time. I used to have to beg to get dates in municipal buildings. I thought it was better by now.
I don't understand it, but yeah, there's still issues with music. It's always been fights. I've spent a lot of my time with city officials, but
the place is privately owned, like
oh, yeah,
Phillips and things.
no, I'm
like
talking
that.
like every time I go into Piedmont, it's a nightmare.
I can imagine.
And the big motivator back then was the Vietnam War, which generated a lot of music.
Richard Nixon in the Vietnam War
Had more to do with
generated a
music
lot
in the
of
60s
records.
than anything.
Yeah. Do y'all know who Richard Nixon is? Does that ring any bells out there at all?
You owe a lot of good music to
Yeah, you
Nixon.
do. Yeah.
Could you let them know, I think today we'd like to make some comparisons and contrast some things. Some of the acts you have there, tell us who they were and approximately how much
You know,
they
Lisa,
got
I
paid
should've-
compared to some
Yeah,
of.
I should have brought a cheat sheet, because remembering all this is not easy. On the first one, I can remember a little better. It was Janis Joplin, Joe Cocker, Led Zeppelin, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and surprisingly, a guy named Dave Brubeck, who was a jazz artist, a great jazz artist, and Tommy Tommy James and the
Shondells.
Shondells, yeah, was my pop act on it. It was the theory when all this started was that it was going to be a broad spectrum of music, but the economics of things came into play, and it really went to a rock and roll, you know.
Would you pay Janis and Zeppelin?
Zeppelin was $2,500. Probably Janis was $5 at that time. But what would that mean in today's money? Not that much either when you think about it. But things were a lot more realistic than they are now. Now the fees that Peter pays these people are just phenomenal, and it's at one time the promoters kind of control things. Now the acts definitely control things, and I'm not as I still do a few things. I own a place in Atlanta called Eddie's Attic, which we deal in singer-songwriters and things like that, and just a phenomenal level of talent that comes through there. But Peter does the big shows now, and I'm happy to have bequeathed them to him. It's a rough business now. It's a rough way to try to make a living.
Yeah, Zeppelin turned down the money that was offered after that O show for Ahmet Ertegun's
It's
Trust.
unbelievable, yeah.
I think that raised $250 million at one show.
That's what I heard.
But they basically don't want to tour. Robert doesn't want to do it, but I think they turned a couple $2 billion down.
Couple of billion?
For a world tour.
Good. Oh, for a world tour.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what a world tour would cost with them. We used to do a lot of things with Led Zeppelin. I shouldn't go into any of those gross stories.
We want a little bit of dirt, just a little.
I don't know, that's a young crowd out there. I don't know if they should.
Did I show you that?
We wanted to
auction
ask
last
about-
week that they were auctioning off Stephen Weiss's memorabilia in Texas.
Really?
Yeah.
But he was in Massachusetts.
It's his family side, but he died just last year.
I'll tell you one story. The manager of Led Zeppelin, one of the crudest, rudest people I've ever come across in my life. The first time I met him, this was after the festival, I was doing one-nighters, and I had like 3 nights with Led Zeppelin in the Southeast, and they were playing Texas, so I flew to Texas to meet them, and I went out to meet the manager. He was standing by the stage with his arms up on the stage like this, and I walked up and I said, "Hey Peter, I'm Alex Cooley." You know, he said, "Hold on a minute." And he raised his left leg and farted. That's really crude story, but just to give you some feeling of what this guy was like. That was one of his nicer moments. He, about 5 years ago, hired a man and woman to take care of him, and he went into his house and locked the doors and did dope all day. They said he did everything, you know, from uppers to downers to sideways. And these people would pour him into bed every night at the end of the night. His first name was Peter. What was his
Peter
name?
Grant.
Peter Grant, yeah. And he's dead now.
Died about 10 years ago, I think.
When did Weiss die?
About 5 years ago, I think.
5 years
Stevens.
ago.
Yeah. Stevens is actually his U.S. partner, I guess, and also represented
Yeah.
Robert.
He was a decent guy.
And remember, he came to our offices in the one on Monroe that burned in the early 90s or late 80s. He came.
Stevens?
Yeah, he worked out of our office for about 2 weeks trying to get the band back together.
Oh,
Remember?
I remember that, yeah.
And it wasn't possible to do it, although the Page Plant tour came out of it, where they both went out and played and did a one run.
What did he, just natural causes?
Yeah, just natural.
speaking of large personality, well, literally large personality with Peter Grant, but artist managers and the relationship between managers and agents and promoters. I mean, how do you fight out and negotiate these deals when they're going to fight so hard for the artist and it's getting harder and harder, as you say, to net any money off the show?
Peter can tell you about now.
It's much different now than it was. When I first started with Alex, it was all about dealing with the agent relationship, and you couldn't dare call a manager, or they'd cut you off. And nowadays, well, first of all, most acts are bought on the national level now. Since the consolidation, it's not a local touring business anymore. I run Live Nation for the Southeast, basically, and it's a lot of our business, probably 80% is national tours. So a big act's coming out, they put them on the block, we bid on it, we get it, you know. We own the worldwide rights to U2, Madonna, Coldplay, Jay-Z's our joint venture partner, Beyonce. We own those rights worldwide and pay a lot of money for them. Then we make the local deal that generates the money to pay those deals back. I still buy some stuff locally. There's certain artists like Bruce Springsteen who won't sell a national tour and very loyal and only works with certain promoters. In the South, it's me. And they still call the agent and you talk to him and make the deal.
That was a request too.
Huh? Yeah. But that's how it's still done with a couple. Elton John's that way. Elton works with local promoter. But there's But there's not a lot of those acts doing that. Mostly, the money has gotten so big as far as these artists get paid now. And we were talking earlier, the dynamic change. Back in the 70s, 80s, artists made about 80% of their money off of records, and they toured to promote the record, whatever. Now they make 90% of their money off of touring. And so they tour constantly to generate income. And the fees are just astronomical.
Yeah. Just, Lisa, he covered what they do now. It's an auction block, and they auction them off. I was looking at I found a box of old files at my mountain house, and I pulled one out, and the file consisted of 3 cocktail napkins, and that was the figuring we did after the show about who was going to get what. It was much more personable then, and it wasn't as cut and dry as it is now. And like I say, most shows we'd go out on tour, we'd go do several dates, and then we'd sit backstage after the show and figure out who was going to get what. And now you go into a show, there's 4 accountants, 3 lawyers, 6 managers.
Well, I used to settle the shows for us, and that was the whole part of the process. Is the night of the show you pay everybody. I mean, there's no carryover. Everything's a percentage deal. So we sit in a room. It'd be me and the tour accountant, and we go through every bill and whatever goes in the show we agree on it. And it was a fairly sometimes adversarial situation.
Very adversarial.
Where we'd fight.
Not always, but some.
Yeah, I had guns pulled on me a couple times, and you would fight over the money and then split it. Nowadays it's all so generic, and I'm not allowed to even do those. We have accounts that go in there on the computer.
No, it's not any fun anymore.
No, it used to be fun. We used to get to sometimes screw the act out extra money to make up for how bad they were or something. And now it's all set out by ratios and whatever. It's all decided.
These acts really do go out. Like 3 CPAs are on the tour. It's a very money-oriented, very. And I'm not saying there isn't still a lot of great music out there. There is. I'm still very much into music, but there's more spin doctors. There's more. What you're seeing is an image that has been created in a room somewhere, not necessarily what the music is all about. Sometimes, not all the time. I'm trying to resist this getting to be an old man and being very cynical, but there's much more what I call image making now than there was before. And there's 42 people spinning the stories about all this.
I think that the motivation in the 60s and 70s was political and for bands to get together, and also to meet girls seem to be the two big factors. Nowadays, it's pretty much money. Bands want to get rich. They want to make money. And that's all you hear all day is how much. And, some of these bands, they're easily making $2 million a night. And,
But just to try to balance this a little bit, because we're both sounding really cynical here, and I don't like to talk to people and just do that. I told you earlier that I own a place called Eddie's Attic in Atlanta, and that's a very low level of touring. We're 165 seats. But those people I found really are doing it for the love. Most of them are doing it for the love of the music and what they're doing. And we deal very little with, agents and managers. We deal with the acts a lot of times. And it's been refreshing for me. It really has. Because, the big Whopper shows, the stadium shows, and that's more like what we've been talking about. But there's still musicians out there that play music because they love music, and they're not that interested in the money. They're more interested in what they're doing music-wise.
Then when they get bigger, they'll want the money.
I was afraid he was going to say that.
No one cares about money at Eddie's Attic, Alex. It's big places. There is one.
I had to get used to the differences, because there we're dealing with $200 for this, and the last one I remember was a U2 show we did at the Georgia Dome, and their nut for that night, we kept looking at what they were going to make all night. I was with the accountant, and their nut for that one night was $1 million. That's what they needed to break even for that night, and we grossed.
They walked out with like $1.05 million.
1.2 million, and 2 of it was profit. But they had 65 trucks. At the height of us loading the show in and everything, there was probably 400 people working on that show.
2 catering tents.
Yeah.
They had a chartered jumbo jet with a set-up dining room in it, so they could eat with silver service after the show.
And that's when I really longed to get back to a more real situation than that.
Well, they did that
and
whole...
U2's a great band, and they're nice people and everything, but
They did that whole tour, an entire worldwide tour on Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And when they got back to Dublin, they split up $65,000.
Yeah. It cost a lot to tour. It's very expensive.
It was.
And just to give them their, we talk about how they want the money. They need the money to go out on tour. And bands, when you get to that level, they do not tour cheaply. They don't stay in a Motel 6. So it costs a great deal of money.
There's one person we should talk about, because I thought about it, is in looking at the history of the concert business. There's one person really, I think, responsible, which I think you'll agree, which is Frank Barcelona.
Absolutely.
Who in 1964 opened Premier Talent.
Yeah.
Frank was an agent at an old line agency before that
GAC.
GAC that booked kind of doo-wop groups and older
Doo-wop
established acts.
and Lawrence Welk and things like that.
And they didn't know what to do with rock acts, and they put them on shows, and they'd sing 2 songs, and then take them off and sing 2 songs. And Frank had this vision of creating artist careers and putting them out touring where they would play entire songs and sets, which later developed into the concept album. But he wanted a network of local promoters that he could work with on baby bands, and then would grow them into larger bands. And he worked with Alex, Bill Graham, Ron Delsner, Don Law. He had a group around the country, and no one got acts from Frank unless it was one of those people. But
You
they
had to be into the
markets
music.
approved them.
He was the first one that looked for promoters that knew what the hell the name, we would at least know who he was talking about when he called us. And a lot of people say he invented the business of rock and roll, and I think that's of the way touring happens now, I think that's probably true.
There's a really good obit on him. He died in November, and Little Steven from East Street Band wrote a really good obit. If you have a chance, look for it online. But he was
It was the New York Times, wasn't it?
well, Rolling Stone ran it too.
Rolling Stone. Okay.
But he, I actually, first time I started working with Alex, I had a person who really got me started was a man named Ahmet Erdogan, who I met when I worked in the White House. And Ahmet and I became friends. And I told him I wanted to be a promoter, and I was talking to Alex, and we were doing some things together. And I was in New York having lunch with him one day at the 21 Club, and he said, well, you know, why do you want to be one of those scumbags? And I said, you know, because he had worked with the old Mustache Pete's and didn't understand. And he said, you need to meet Frank Barcelona. So he called and sent me over, and I sat outside Frank's office for about a half hour and watched this incredible room he had with all the agents. And I saw Bill Graham running across with someone, and they were talking about the Who tour and all these people running back and forth. And finally went in, and Frank saw me, and he sat down and he talked to me for about 30 minutes, I guess. He just wanted to know if I liked music, basically. He didn't want to know, he didn't know about business. He asked about acts, he asked about music. And at the end of the meeting, he said, okay, you got Billy Squier in Memphis, and gave me a date. And that's what started me being able to call Premiere, because that show sold out first day, and that's the first show I got from Premiere. But that was just how he had to work.
You know, I'm just thinking they're all dead. Frank,
Barbara,
Jane,
Jorge,
George, Jorge, yeah.
No one's left.
How sad. Terrible topic to bring up.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to segue from that.
Yeah, there is no segue from death.
Yeah.
Right. Premiere went out of business about 10 years ago when U2 left them.
Yeah.
He broke U2, and
He broke everybody,
Yeah.
basically.
and I remember when he made us do U2 when they were a small band and they weren't that good, and he'd call you up and say, I want you to do this band and I'll make it up to you, and we did them, and they were not very good originally. And then when they got really big, they fired them. And
Along with every other band, too.
yeah, and then Bruce left, and
Bruce
they
left,
just-
yeah.
and the agency, I went up to see the last year, it was just Barbara and one person.
Yeah.
And
Sad.
it was sad, it was one little room, and, you know, next year.
But that just, you know, the point here, if there is a point, is that things change. And y'all are gonna be looking at a whole different situation in a few years. It's changing as we speak. I don't know where it's going. Maybe Peter does, do you?
Well, you know, it just seems to get bigger. I
It
think
seems that a few groups get bigger, and the middle groups, and sometimes this is where the talent is, they can't make a living.
we gross more money every year, but we're selling less tickets, which is not a great trend. But the
high ticket price, don't get me started on that.
well, a lot of the I don't see enough of the younger acts coming up and lasting long enough. You know, it used to be they came out, played the Electric Ballroom, then the Fox,
Right.
and then the Omni, and, you know, they got bigger, and now bands seem to come out, play, and kind of disappear. And the real bands that I'm still making money are the bands from 20, 30 years ago. I mean, Springsteen, U2.
Nobody's developing any new talent. That's what it seems to me.
Radio is non-existent.
Yeah.
And we're back to a singles business. The concept album's dead. Everybody's downloading singles. Nobody's buying albums. Nobody really thinks about the concept album anymore. We're back to the 1950s and early 60s when it was single driven. So, and the label business is just like the corset industry. I mean, it's non-existent. Whatever labels are left will be some content company at some point. But, you know, most of the major acts, I mean, Jay-Z, when he was in Atlanta, I mean, he cut his last record in his bus in Atlanta when he was recording, when he was performing. I mean, they don't need to go to big studios anymore and go through the whole. I mean, the record label process was in some ways a scam on how they made their money. And they let the acts go in the studio and they charge them a humongous amount of money for that. And they charge them all this marketing money, and they charge them X amount to print the record. that they made money on, and so the acts saw less and less, and then the acts now realize that they can do all that themselves and it doesn't cost anything.
It's very similar to what's happening in the book publishing business too, but pretty much the same thing. Is this pretty much a music business audience?
Yes.
So, okay.
Largely.
So most of y'all want to go into the music business? Is that?
And there's no record stores anymore.
There's Apple. That's the record store now. Which I love.
Record stores were a sociological thing. Peaches, I mean, people went and gathered and went and bought the new record every week when it came out.
You know, nobody will ever convince me that Apple isn't a good thing. I love downloading music. I love sampling it and seeing if I like it, and then downloading it. I retired about 7 years ago. I spent 3 years just downloading music. It was just such an incredible technology thing to me. I said, you can do that, you can, do this, and you've got it. And I still love it. I think it's fantastic.
Well, the old model, which was record labels recorded the record, then they went and promoted it through a station and had people promote it so that you would listen to it and buy it, and then the artist went out and toured on it. And that model's broken, and it's not going to be fixed. The new model is that these artists announce their tours, whether they have a new record out or not, and if they do, you can load it down line or whatever, and it's only one song usually that you want, and I don't think it works as well. I don't think it creates excitement.
It doesn't build acts anymore, right?
No, and you don't hear things other than what you want to hear, because when you used to listen to the radio, you heard things that were new to you, and then the radio would say, by the way, that's a song by a guy named Bruce Springsteen. Then they stopped saying who it was.
Yeah, but you know what, if you're downloading, you can just go from one thing to another. I mean, they give you suggestions. Some of them, well, I like it. You don't like it, but I like it. How many here download? Can I see your hands?
Oh.
Legally? How many do it legally? Illegally? You wouldn't admit it anyway. That's interesting. I think whatever the future of music is, that's part of it.
Yeah, but when you download, you're by yourself in a room on a computer, right?
That's true, yeah. It's not a social thing, you're right.
Well, that's where I'm going to segue, because live music and the concert experience is social.
It's a gathering of the tribe.
And I don't want to miss the opportunity to hear how you two how you got into business together. Were you competitors
What
before
story
that?
are we telling nowadays?
Alex doesn't remember when I first met him. Actually, I was working for President Carter when he was Governor Carter, running for president, and I was on his staff, and a guy named Tom Beard said, I'm going to go down to see Phil Walden in Macon today about the Allman Brothers. You want to come with me? And I was working in the campaign office, was at 1776 Peachtree, and those days there was like 20 of us working for the president, because nobody thought Carter could win. And I said, sure, I want to get out of the office. So I went with Tom, and on the way we stopped at Alex's office. And you were on, I think, 10th Street maybe, near the Silver Skillet or something.
Yeah, near the Silver Skillet.
And I went upstairs, and he had to talk to him, and I met Alex very briefly, and we talked. And then went down and spent the day with Macon with Phil. And then go ahead, 4 years, we're in Washington, and we're going to run for re-election, and Hamilton Jordan, who was kind of my boss and mentor, said, anybody know anything about concerts? And I said, done a few, and he said, great, we got some acts who want to work for the president, Willie Nelson, and mentioned some others, and I called Alex and introduced myself again, and talked to him about doing some benefits we were doing in Atlanta, and we started doing benefits together. And that's how I first started working with him, doing some Carter benefits. And then when we lost, I came back here.
Fox with a
Fox Theater.
Yeah.
And then I came back here when we lost, and I started a consulting company. I was doing some political consulting. I was still a consultant to the president, and doing some things for him. And then I was trying to do some shows, and I came to see Alex about Chastain. which I had seen was sitting there and no one was doing anything, and Andy Young was mayor, who I knew from Washington, and I went to see Andy about doing shows there, and he liked the idea, so
Yeah.
we started doing shows in Chastain together.
The first was the Pointer Sisters.
No, the first one was Leon Redbone.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
I got Leon Redbone at Eddie's Attic.
Yeah, and to see if it worked, and it did okay, and then we did the Pointer Sisters.
Yeah.
And sold it
The
out.
Pointer Sisters out.
Yeah.
Let me tell the story of the Carter benefit in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, okay.
Probably the worst experience I ever had.
That was Tom here.
Robert Peter too. Is we were doing a big benefit for President Carter in Jacksonville, Florida, the Gator Bowl, and we had
Skinner.
Leonard Skinner, who was big all over the country at that time, but they were gigantic in Jacksonville. They had never played their hometown. Marshall Tucker, Charlie Daniels. That was it. Okay. Leonard Skinner was the headliner, and we started the date, and I think Charlie went on, and then Marshall Tucker went on, and I was on the stage, and we had something like 30, 40,000 people, something like that, that had bought a ticket to come see this show. And I got a message on stage that Ronnie Van Zant was sick backstage and that I better come see about it. And I got back there and Ronnie was throwing up and really very, very sick, and they couldn't go on. And so we had 30,000 people out there and waiting, and they had all come to see Leonard Skinner. If there were any Marshall Tucker fans there, I'd be surprised. But I was elected to go out and tell everybody that Leonard Skinner wasn't going to be there. And I was genuinely frightened. It was a scary situation. And we got Marshall Tucker to, how did we?
I wasn't there.
Beard was there.
Beard was there, yeah. Marshall Tucker hadn't played at that point in time. Charlie Daniels had. So I went to Marshall Tucker and told them that what had happened and everything. And so we worked it out to where I would go out and say, we've got Marshall Tucker here, and wasn't that a great show, and all that kind of crap you say in between. And then I was going to just say, oh, and by the way, Leonard Skinner is in the house. And they were supposed to start playing immediately right then. And we pulled it off, but it was really a scary night.
One of my favorite Skinner stories, though, is the Fox.
We have a lot of Skinner stories.
The Fox Theater, when they started getting big, they called Alex and they said they wanted a case of Dom Perignon champagne.
Yeah, right.
And Alex knew they didn't know what the heck they were asking for, and but they heard they should ask for it. So we went up, got a bottle of Dom and a case of cold duck, and we sent the first bottle in, and they drank it. We went and got the empty bottle, put a funnel in it, poured the cold duck, sent it back in. Went through a case of cold duck, and the end of the night, the band came and said, "That's the best damn champagne."
That's really true. Peter and I have a lot of stories, but that one happens to be one of the true ones.
I had a show at the Dome about 10 years ago, Metallica, Kid Rock, I forget who else, and the day before the show, James and Metallica went jet skiing in Lanier and threw his back out, couldn't even walk. And he had a bad back, which I understand why the hell he was jet skiing. And I called my doctor, who went to see him, and gave him a bunch of shots in the back, got him up where he could walk, and left the room. And then James went over and tried to pick up his suitcase and threw out his back again. And they called me up and said, there's no way this guy's going to be able to play. So I had 40s, maybe 50,000 tickets sold in the Dome.
Did I do that well?
Yeah. And I went down to the Dome and talked to their manager, and he said, come on, we got to go and see the band. And we went and sat down with Lars and the other guys, and they're really upset because you know, they couldn't play, and they didn't want to refund everybody, and Lars was mad because he was going to go on vacation, didn't want to reschedule, and I didn't want to refund all the tickets and pay for the shows, so we talked to Kid Rock, and we basically played the other bands, and then when Metallica was supposed to go on, we put up Kid and a bunch of other people and sang Metallica songs.
Did you get away with this?
Got away with it. Yeah. Nobody asked for a refund, and it was fine. I mean, we considered duct taping him into a chair and letting him play guitar. They didn't like that, and so but we ended up pulling the show off.
Who was that guy that we had in Atlanta on a sold-out show, and they called us and said his back was out, and you were watching television that night, and you saw him live from a disco in New York.
Was that the Air Supply show?
No, it was, what's the woman, Annie Lennox?
Dave
What?
Dave Stewart?
He's a huge producer now.
Yeah.
Very successful.
Can't give away a ticket.
Yeah, I know, no problem. But that night we saw, the show was canceled because he was, well, I've already said it.
In those days, they just could make it up. You can't do that nowadays with corporate and all. People say, well, fine, where is he? We'll send a doctor over and have him checked out. But those days they made stuff up and they would just cancel on you and stick you with the show.
Well, before we open up the floor to questions, these are the two gentlemen that founded Music Midtown, and I'd like you to talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll open up the floor because they've got to go, I think at 3:15, Dave?
Yeah, well, some folks have 3:30 classes. Class in here usually wraps up at 3:15.
Okay, well, I definitely want to give them a chance, but I do want them to hear about Music Midtown.
That was Alex's baby, really. He started it in, what, 94?
94 sounds right. I'm bad at chronology, but that sounds right.
I tried to talk him out of it first.
Yeah, he did. But I wanted to do something. I cut my teeth on pop festivals, and they're really, I don't know if Coachella comes close to making a pop festival. So in certain monitored situations, they can still happen. But we started Music Midtown because I was lonesome for that kind of thing. But mostly what I wanted to do, I can't get away from this thing that music is a big, broad world out there. It's not just rock and roll. It's not just rap. And if you're really into one kind of music, you should explore. I think you should explore other. And so the concept of the original pop festival was to have a wide variety of talent on it. And that's what we tried to accomplish with Music Midtown. We had an urban stage, we had two rock and roll stage, we did Tony Bennett, things like that, and tried to show in some bands that you've never heard of, the bands that I had heard that I really wanted to have an audience. What are some of the people we had on Music Midtown, Peter?
Everybody from the Black Crowes to STP, Bob Dylan,
Joan Baez,
Journey, Kid Rock, Black Eyed Peas,
Santana.
Yeah, I mean, it just June Carter Cash. I mean, it ran the gamut. When it got to its height at around 97, we were doing 100,000 people a day for 3 days. And actually, the people who started Austin City Limits, Bonnaroo, all came to Atlanta to study Music Midtown and actually used our model for what they developed.
Did we ever get any royalties or anything?
And then I put it on hiatus about 6 years ago because
it was a bad 3 years of just terrible weather.
And we had a lousy site. The mayor didn't support us, and she put us on a really crummy site.
Some towns really encourage things like Chicago. If you go to Chicago in the summer, there's a festival just about every week. I mean, it's just a real happening town. And even in New York and Central Park. But I have to say Atlanta does everything they can to stop it from happening, unfortunately.
Well, the new mayor really good. He encouraged, but the last mayor, Shirley Franklin, was an idiot. And she met with 6 neighbors who didn't like it and made my life miserable for 3 years, over 6 people. Even though it was making all this, she didn't understand that it was generating all this income for the city, all these people were filling the hotels, all this income it was generating. And she just could see 6 neighbors.
I'm of the opinion if you live in a city, there's got to be a reward for it. I mean, it's hard enough sometimes. And the cultural things that happen in a city, I think, are a good thing. And everything that happens in Atlanta like this, and maybe the new mayor will change that.
No, the new mayor is great. I mean, he loves events, he gets it, he understands it generates it's not only cultural but economic, it generates all this income. I mean, we fill all the hotels currently in Midtown, and
with Music Midtown, we did it in spite of the city instead of.
Well, Bill Campbell supported it, and then Shirley did.
Yeah, he did.
The last year, you have to have support of the city to do something like this, and we pay all our own services, we pay the city rent, and the last year I went to see the mayor about the site, and they wanted more money, and I said I can't do it, and they thought I was kidding, and they had it in their budgets, and I pulled the plug on it at the last minute, because we were paying them tremendous amount of money in rent, $200,000, so paying all the services we had to clean up. Police bills were running over $200,000. I mean, so we were paying our bills plus generating all this, and we just want to be left alone. But it got where they were just kind of causing us problems. So I kept it on hiatus till the city supported it, and the new mayor has embraced it, and we're doing great with it.
Good, glad to hear that.
Well, let's give the opportunity to ask some questions. Dave, will you help me on this?
Alex.
I have one for Peter. So how did you get involved with Jimmy Carter? You said you were really big into music even when you were in college. So how did you get that?
I was going to law school, and I was bored again, and I was watching the news in the library one night, and it said Jimmy Carter was running for president. He had announced he was governor, and he was going to run, and this is right after Nixon. And, he appointed Ford, and everybody didn't like that because then Ford pardoned Nixon. So it kind of reeked of a bad deal, although in history it was pretty the right thing to do. Ford probably did the right thing. But everyone wanted to change, and Carter had a really good image, and I liked him, and I sent a resume into the Carter campaign, and they actually called me, and I thought, wow, it must be because I've got such a great resume or whatever, and because no one else was sending in resumes. They hired me on the spot as an intern. And,
everybody thought it was a joke at one time when he first announced it.
Yeah, the people were laughing at him. And I went down and I told my parents, and they said fine. And then like 6 months later, I had to make a choice. Hamilton came to me and said, look, we really like you, but you're going to have to be full-time. You can't go to law school. So. And I told my parents I was going to quit. My dad was pretty good. He said, look, it's a great experience at the worst, and you can always go to school again. So I stayed with him. And when I first started, we had 12 people on staff, and a year later, we had 2,500. So, and then we won the nomination and went on to win the presidency. But it was just sending the resume in and taking a shot at it.
Yes, sir.
Hey, my name's Cameron. I was wondering what you guys might think would be like a possible solution to, help out the music business. Because I know Alex, I believe, said there was no real artist development today. So I was wondering what you guys would probably, advise.
Yes, I said there's not much, or there's not as much as I would like to see. And I get that question all the time about what should a young band do, how do they break open? The only thing I know in this day and time is just to play every place you can possibly play. Bar mitzvahs, weddings, whatever, play. And I think in the next few years things will become a little bit easier to do it. You need to be savvy on the internet. There's many bands that owe their existence right now to being on the internet. You need to get to a certain level where you're touring and playing the places, the small venues in each town, and then you need to play them. And I wish I could give you better advice than that, but I don't think anybody can. There's no record label for you to go to and have a demo reel and play it for them and get signed, and then they put the money behind you and do all the machinations that the record companies used to do. That's something that's gone totally by the board. So it sounds lame, and I realize it sounds lame, but that's the best advice I can give. Maybe Peter has better.
No, I agree with you. Play anything you can play, get your name out there, promote yourself on the internet. I mean, if you remember, Justin Bieber discovered on YouTube. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
Scooter Braun, who discovered him, actually worked for me when he left Emory. I hired him, and he helped us on Music Midtown. And he left that, and then he went and discovered Justin on YouTube. So, you know, you have that to promote yourself, the internet, and anything you can do there. But you'll find that the more you play, the better you get. You need to play in front of people. You know, you need to see how people react to you. I mean, the famous story of the Beatles was, you know, they went off to Hamburg and played 3 shows a day for something like 6 months in Hamburg and came back to England a whole different band because they were so good. And that's what it takes, is just playing together. So,
And always give everything, you know, I've seen bands in a situation where it wasn't a full house and it was just a few people. Always play and always do the best show you could possibly do. And I know that sounds kind of Pollyannish, but I think it's true.
When it comes to throwing festivals, do you find that most bands like negotiate their price down because they are on board with what you're trying to do, or is it mainly like you know their agent or you know their manager, so you can talk them down?
the price on festivals always goes up.
Always go
There's a thing they call festival money, and it's usually much higher than their normal fee.
Band figures like, they'll look at a big town like Atlanta or New York, and they'll figure the smart ones have 1 play a year in it. Some of them do 2 plays a year at a town. I'm of the opinion that you underplay a market, not overplay it, and 2 I think is too much. But when a festival comes along, they figure that takes that play out of the market, sometimes 2 plays out of the market. And the money is stronger, I guess, so it is.
When we started in
Did you say
'94,
double?
we had a rule in '94 where we wouldn't pay anybody over $100 grand.
Yeah.
And we did it, and it was great. It was before corporate America hit. Most of my headliners now are 7 figures.
The first year that you brought back Music Midtown to the second year this past year, the headliners, the second year there were a lot more headliners. Do you see Music Midtown now that the mayor is a little bit more lenient, continue to grow, maybe after Caliber?
There was one more headliner.
Or one more, but like the names were like.
It was 2 days instead of 1 day.
Right.
We didn't have time. We only got approved the first year 90 days out. So I had that idea of, do we really think we can pull off a festival in 90 days? I talked to my people and they all said, let's go for it. So we got on the phone, and I knew if we didn't do it, we'd have the same fight next year. So we had to produce. So luckily Coldplay was flying to Brazil to do a show, and we talked them into stopping off in Atlanta on their way. And then the Black Keys were in their studio in Nashville, and we gave enough money where they felt motivated to drive down for the day. And then we built around that. The second year we had a whole year planned, and we had 2 days. This year we're probably going to expand some of what goes on site. It'll still be 2 days, but yeah, we're looking at a plan to eventually grow it more, and the mayor so far has been supportive. So I hope it'll eventually be a 3-day multi-stage festival.
Was there a gentleman back there that had a question?
Yeah. Given what you've seen, like over your career, it seems like most of what you started with was rock and roll, and you talked about how sociologically, like the institutions of the music industry are changing. People are downloading and not going to record stores and hanging out and talking about music. Do you think that is going to lead into new ways of sharing music, or do you think that music as a whole is just going to be more of a...
Technology keeps changing constantly. I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. Everybody kind of is waiting for the other shoe to drop, I think. But we see changes constantly in what's going on. I don't think the concert business will ever ultimately change, though. You may change on how you buy a ticket or what that ticket looks like, but there'll always be a process where you go see a band live. I mean, that's the one basis of our business model as a corporation, is that concerts are going to always happen. People want to be in a room with a live band and see them with other people. And that is just the bedrock of our business model. And I think that will always survive. And don't you feel that?
I agree with that, yeah.
People always want to go to concerts.
People have been going to concerts since the medieval times, and I think it will continue, yes.
Well, I know my band's playing a show tonight, and there's a company that's coming there called Stage It that will be filming the show, and it will be broadcast over the internet, and people have to pay to watch the show from their homes through this service. So, and supposedly the money will come back to the bands. I don't know, but I wonder, do you allow these types of services into your?
Well, it's a whole different thing. You're talking about really a legal rights issue. One, the band needs to control the rights on the broadcast. You don't want to give those up in perpetuity. You want to allow them to have them for that one broadcast, but then the band should retain all future rights. Otherwise, you're giving whoever that person is that footage forever. You know, and it's a content business now, so you don't want to do that. So you don't ever want to give away those rights, but that's more of a rights issue. And most pay-per-views, as a general rule, aren't that successful because watching concerts on TV, I mean, you know, even the big bands like U2 and the Rolling Stones have a hard time pulling it off. It's just not the same thing.
Did you have the Rolling Stones did on that last pay-per-view? Was it
Since
successful?
their numbers, but I doubt it.
I agree with Peter. There's nothing substitute for live, and I think with streaming and everything, and we're starting to stream some stuff. I don't think it's going to. You would think with the need for content that there's so many television stations and broadcasters now.
They tried it.
But the only thing I know that's consistently worked is Austin City Limits. And Austin City Limits has been successful because they do it so damn well. And they bring in groups that you might not have heard, but that are really good.
They tried it a bunch in the 80s. There's a big push. Everybody's doing pay-per-view and big shows, and they never did well. I mean,
at one time, everybody thought pay-per-view was going to be the thing, but it's never worked out.
It's just one-dimensional.
Yeah, a lot of people have tried.
Question, Peter and Alex too. You talk about how young artists are struggling to really reach the statuses of like the U2s and the Bruce Springsteens, like the arena rockers. They have more loyal fan bases, and that artists they are struggling to like attain like a loyal fan base. And then you mentioned like it being rooted in like the image that like music, like the artists are like we as fans are seeking out an image as opposed to music. Do you believe that basically like us as fans aren't as attracted to the music as opposed to like what the status of the artist is or what is cool or what is in, or is that what the artists are really trying to do?
There's a question in there somewhere, right?
I'm sorry, I'm half deaf, which probably should be. So I can't hear you. I don't know what you.
I think I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, people are drawn, I think, through maybe a social competitiveness to see certain bands. They feel they need to see them, that they want to have been part of that. And bands that are successful have known how to nurture that and grow that. Like, the Stones are going to probably come out this year, and everybody's going to want to see them because they feel they should see them. And they're still, I just saw them in New Jersey, it's still one of the best shows you'll ever see. I mean, it's an incredible band still. And but there has always been that. It was more in the 70s where people were judged by what bands they listened to and what records they bought. But there's always been kind of a, hey, did you go to that or did you see that? And even the historic part of it where, you know, people always talk about Alex's the Electric Ballroom, which is his legendary club when Springsteen played there. I mean, everybody says they saw. I mean, if everybody told us had been at that show, there'd been 20,000 people there. You know, but there is that draw. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the legend is bigger than the talent. You know,
but not in Bruce's case.
no. We were talking to him backstage one night, and we talked about that. We brought up the ballroom, and he said, yeah, you know, he said, I was doing a show with this guy, and I won't mention the band, and he's a friend of ours, and he said, Bruce, you know, I was at your ballroom show, and that was great. Bruce said, you know, I looked at him, and I know how old he is, and I ran the numbers. He would have been like 7 years old.
What words of wisdom would you have for someone trying to break into working on large scale like music events like your Music Midtown or other festivals?
Well, first of all, don't start there.
Well, eventually to get that.
Yeah, I get inundated by emails. People just want to jump in at Music Midtown. So.
Yeah.
Can I help?
You know, for every one time that happens, there's 10,000 people that want that slot. And every once in a while it does. You remember young Charles, who now goes out with Sting and has another business. He started, you know, I think he was a student at Emory. And there are those things, and you can try to get into them. But I think if you really want to be around music and you want to be in the music business, you know, starting small is really not a bad idea. Like the 40 Watt Club, and you know, going to places like that, listening to bands that you like, trying to work for those bands on that level.
Work for free, you know, offer you go.
And you do have to work for free or almost no money. I'm not sure I would tell you to do that, but if you are going to do it, I think that's the way. Trying to get involved in Music Midtown or any of the big festivals is going to be really tough getting your foot in the door. It really is.
When I first did shows up here, I used to volunteer and unload the trucks for free at the show before I got on the concert committee at Coliseum. One day I helped Billy Joel unload his U-Haul, just he and I all day. I mean, that's, you know, but I just started doing that to meet people, and that's how I started, but I didn't get paid for it. You know, I just see the show.
You notice, Peter, we're losing our audience. We must be getting boring.
No, they have class.
Any more?
Hey, my name is Beth Moore. I'm an entertainment attorney down in Atlanta. I also run the Atlanta chapter of the National Association of Record Industry Professionals. And I want to first thank you guys because I grew up in the Music Midtown throughout middle school and high school and college. So thank you for that. I had a lot of coming of age moments at Music Midtown. So I was wondering if you could just share any stories that you remember from those years, any special acts or memories or disasters that maybe happened behind the scenes.
Music Midtown stories. One was James Brown.
That's a good story.
We were doing it one year because his career was kind of sliding, and Alex and I've always had this thing of wanting people to see certain legendary artists at whatever time, whether it be Johnny Cash or whatever. We try to bring them back into Atlanta near that point so, you know, people remember. And so we put James on Music Midtown, and at that stage he really wasn't doing a whole lot of a show. He'd just kind of stand there and have all these people run around and make it look good. And we were really on a time schedule overtime, and he wasn't at the stage. And I called over to his hotel and got his road manager, and he had us send a limo for him. And the road manager said, the car's not big enough. You need the biggest limo you have in Atlanta, Mr. Brown's not coming. So
what is the color? He didn't like the color.
No, it was the length. He'd send the guy down with a tape measure. The guy would measure it and tell him how big it was, and he'd say it's not big enough. So finally I sent a second car, which was the biggest car our operator had, and I called back and said, what's he say? He said, not big enough. I said, I'm coming over there. So I came over and I stood and I looked at the car, and the road manager came down, and I said, okay, tell Mr. Brown for every 5 minutes he's not down here, I'm taking $5,000 off his fee. And he was down in about 3 minutes. And he got in the car and went over, which was actually a block away.
In his defense, and we've worked with several of the real old stars that had come up through the ranks when he did, and they used to be cheated so bad and treated so bad that now they were doing it back to promoters. Why don't you tell them the Chuck Berry story?
Oh, God. Chuck Berry is one of the worst human beings on the planet. And I had the awful experience of putting him on a show at Chastain, and he had this...
We did it twice.
Yeah, the second time. He had this game he played where the contracts always say show starts at 8 p.m. and then it would say when the artist goes on. Well, his contract would just say 8 p.m. And then he'd come to you and he'd say, we need to renegotiate because I'm either going on at 8 p.m. or I'm leaving. And of course, no one goes on first. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. He said, okay, well, give me $5,000 cash. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said, well, I'm leaving. I said, okay. And he jumps in his car, and he's got this girl with him. And he drives up to the end of the gate, and he calls me from up there and says, you know, I'm leaving. I said, okay. And then he sends the girl down, and the girl comes in and says, you know, he's going to leave unless you give him $5,000. I said, yeah, I know. And
wait a minute. That's not the way it happened. You gave him the $5,000.
Well, I'm getting there.
Because I was, okay.
So,
I'm still mad at you for doing it.
Then finally, the crowd's going crazy, so he comes back down, I give him $5,000, and he goes out on stage and says, the reason he was late was because I didn't pay him that night to the entire audience, and tells them I stiffed him and performed. So
I'd worked with him. Well, I don't think you were involved or something, because I knew he was going to do this. And I was trying to get there. I was out of town, and the flight was late or something. I don't remember. Because I was trying to get because I would not have given him the $5,000.
His agent still calls.
He would have played the day. I mean, eventually he would have played. But don't tell him what he would have said to the audience at that point in time.
That's why you don't see him play in Atlanta at any time anymore.
Do you know who we're talking about? No matter what you say about him, he was one of the seminal influences of rock and roll. I mean, without a doubt. But you know,
just a lousy human being.
Well, yeah. I've heard some other stories about it too. I think you might be right.
I had a question. You were talking about how Atlanta in the past was kind of viewed as, you know, it wasn't respected as much. Do you find that today it is on par with, say, New York, LA as a like music epicenter, or do you think it's still got a little bit of...
It's not on par with those two markets. No, those still are two of the premier markets in the United States. But it's definitely on par with Miami and Chicago.
It's a top 10 market.
Well within. And to think that it's come that far in relatively a short period of time is really amazing. Because it was, on one time, there was a thing here called the Chitlin Circuit, and Atlanta was definitely on that. And so it's changed a lot. Now, an act, at least they used to feel like they had to play Atlanta. That if they didn't break Atlanta, if they didn't get Atlanta radio and get some ink in Atlanta, that they would never get to where they wanted to be. And I think it's still that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even when they did the consolidation on Wall Street, I mean, Atlanta was a target market. They felt they had to have it, but we're a top 10 market still nationally, and we still rate very well as far as how our shows do. Phillips Arena is always nominated as one of the best arenas in the country. You know, Fox Theater's always up as one of the best. Chastain's always up for best amphitheater in the country. I mean, it's definitely on everybody's radar. And a lot of it is because of what Alex did. When Alex started, he had to talk people into it in the 60s. I mean, in those days up north, when my family moved down here, people thought we were all running around in our bare feet down dirt roads to the fishing hole, you know? They really didn't understand Atlanta. And there's still some of that. In LA, they still kind of talk down to us like we're, you know, inbred or something, but mostly worldwide, we get a lot of attention.
To expound on Beth's question, and Peter, you and I have talked a lot about Phil Walden in the past. Who were some of the most memorable characters, do you think?
Phil was definitely
right up there as character and memorable. He was a genius. I mean, Phil discovered Otis Redding and built Otis's career, and then Otis unfortunately died right as he was breaking, and then he discovered the Allman Brothers and built them up, and then he just pretty much discovered Widespread Panic, he and his son. And so he built acts continually, but he was a real genius.
And he believed in the Allman Brothers when no one else did, and risked his personal livelihood or fortune or something.
And broke Southern music in the 70s. Capricorn Records was world known, but he had Marshall Tucker, Allman Brothers, Wet Willie, you know, Skinner, anything they had was all broke with this idea of Southern music, and he went up to New York and sold it through Atlantic, and you know, he ran really a fiefdom up through the late 70s, early 80s.
That young man right back there in the plaid shirt has been trying. Yeah.
I had a question. You guys are talking about baby bands. So a band is starting out. You guys book big shows and stuff. Would you suggest a band like that try to find a company to book for them, or just try to book?
Absolutely. If you can find one when you first start up, they're not that interested in you.
You have to book yourself.
You got to start out booking yourself. Yes.
Well, if you have an option.
Yeah, if you can get an agent, yeah. I mean, it's always good to have an agent. Just make sure they know what they're doing.
If you can get one that you trust and that you believe knows the markets and knows that would be the ideal. But what I'm telling you is a young band without any credibility at the time, and you might be a great band, but you just haven't been around long enough. It's very hard to get a good agent. But just one little word of caution is that you're going to run across a lot of sleaze people out there. So be careful of that.
Be careful what you sign to. People sign things away. Make sure you get a good attorney who knows music and protect your rights. I mean, there's horror stories. The Beatles don't own their publishing. You know, Bruce Springsteen had to sue his first manager, couldn't work for 2 years. Yeah. Billy Joel, the same thing, to get out of these onerous contracts. I mean, even Collective Soul recently. I mean, be careful what you sign, have it reviewed, protect your rights, never give up your publishing.
Creedence Clearwater Revival. Do you know who I'm talking about? I have to ask. I'm never sure anymore. They have never made a dime off their publishing because of a bad contract, and that cost them, you know, a huge amount of money.
Fogerty wouldn't sing Creedence songs until just the last 4 or 5 years, just because someone else was making the money on it. He wouldn't sing them. Now he is, but they signed with the first manager, a guy named Gans, right? Saul Gans.
If you said his name,
yeah, he went into film publishing or film.
He probably made what, $20 million off the publishing rights.
No, tell them what those
publishing. If you haven't found out by now, I'm sure you have, is really a lucrative thing, and a lot of bands think they're not giving up much when they give up their publishing, and you are. If you hit it. In fact, in today's world, it probably is the most lucrative part of a band.
It's going to start sliding in the future because the royalties in the past have been ASCAP and BMI, and if you had a really big song, say like Born to Run by Springsteen or something, every time it's played on the radio, you got the royalty, whether it's 25, 30 cents, so you can imagine worldwide what you were getting every month. But with more and more station formats changing and dropping, I think a lot of these bands are going to start seeing their royalties slip a bit. You had a question.
I was just going to ask if either of you two had any experience with Michael Jackson before he passed away.
Yeah. Oh boy. I actually have a good Jackson story. I did, President Carter called me once, and I can't remember the year, and he said, I just talked to Michael Jackson, and Michael's gonna do a benefit for me at the Omni for the Atlanta project, which was Carter's project to inoculate low-income housing kids, and would you produce it for me? And I said, sure, Mr. President, not a problem. And we started it, and we announced, and Carter said all these kids who came to get vaccinations would get a free ticket to this show. And in one day, they inoculated 20-some thousand kids that all got tickets to see Michael. And so like 2 weeks later, I called Michael's agent then, which was a manager, Sandy Gallen. And I said, yeah, I'm producing this thing for the president, and Michael's gonna perform. And he said, what? I said, yeah. And he said, let me call you back. He said, you misunderstand, Michael's coming, but he's not performing. And so I called the president in his office, and I said, look, talk to chief staff, you gotta let him know that Michael's not performing. He's just gonna show up. So I called a friend of mine, Scott Sasser, running Turner then, now runs Hearst Network, which is all A&E and all that. And I said, I kind of need a show. So Scott sent the Turner people out. We sat down and we built a show with wrestlers and people from Turner and cartoon characters and this little group that had put a record out named TLC. And they were willing to play. And so the day of the show, we loaded in, and kids are all loving it because we're just keeping them busy and doing all this, and Michael's backstage. And before the show, we had problems because Michael's people took Carter's phone, which is a Secret Service line, and they wanted to arrest Michael's people, and we had to stop that. And then right before the show, Michael went and locked himself in the utility closet with a phone. And he called Brooke Shields, and he wouldn't come out. And we needed to start the show. We wanted overtime. So I had to go over to the president and said, Mr. President, I hate asking you this. He said, what do you need, Peter? I said, would you mind talking Michael out of the closet? And he won't come out. And, Carter's one of the nicest guys, and he didn't flinch. He said, sure, where is he? I said, over there. And he walks over, and here's Carter talking to this louver door. And all of a sudden it opens, and Michael comes out and goes out to the show. And we did one show and then another show right after, and he cleared the house. And Carter comes up and he says, I think Michael's really liking it. And I think he's going to sing. So I'm going to hand him the microphone when I introduce him next time and see if he'll sing for us. And I said, all right, Mr. President. I said, we have a DAT in there, and we can always do it if you want. So we're going to watch, and Carter's introducing everybody, and he says, and now Michael Jackson. And Michael's holding Emmanuel Lewis like this. And Carter hands him the microphone. And Michael looks at it and hands it right back to Carter. And that was the end of the show, and then they ran out the back. But that was my whole day with Michael. It started at 8 in the morning when he called and requested cartoons. I had to go to Turner and get about 12 video cassettes of cartoons because he wanted to sit in his dressing room and watch cartoons with Emmanuel and Lisa Marie. That was before they got married. But that's I think the only time I've really worked with Michael. It was a workout.
Anybody else? Well, Peter, Alex.
Lisa?
I'm still not worthy. We thank you so much on behalf of the Special Collections Library at the University of Georgia, the Music Business Program, David Barbie, all the students. Please, let's stand.